Hi, my name is Kirk, your host of the Staying Healthy Today show. This is a show where we bring you key experts in the fields of nutrition, prevention, integrative, and lifestyle medicine. And sometimes we'll interview them in person. Sometimes I will do a print interview like I'm going to do today, and sometimes I will review a topic. But today's topic is, can a high carb diet reverse type 2 diabetes and reduce insulin need in type 1 diabetes? And the answer is yes. And it's bringing back an individual who did a print interview, wasn't able to do a video at this time, but a print interview, Dr. Hana Kahleova. She's an MD, a medical doctor and trained in endocrinology, and she's also PhD, has a PhD in human physiology. And she's from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And I have about 6 or 7 peer review articles that she's co-authored on the topic of whole food, plant-based diets, diabetes, and whether you can reverse it or not. And so anyway, I'd like to get into it. And so I'm going to paraphrase some of my questions and then her answers. How long, I asked her, how long have you been studying whole food plant-based diets and diabetes? And she's been doing it most of her career for almost 20 plus years. She's been studying whole food plant-based diets. And whole food plant-based diets would mean that you're not eating, a key point here is processed carbohydrate. You're eating carbohydrate, a lot of it, but it's unprocessed beans, lentils, peas, yams, sweet potatoes, whole fruit, not all the processed carbohydrates with sugars, bad sugars, fats, oils, and no fiber in them. And so I ask her, where did the idea, because you always hear it, that carbs are bad for diabetes or they can cause diabetes. And that usually comes from the very simple fact that when you eat carbohydrate, it gets broken down into its simplest form usually, and it gets absorbed as sugar and it makes blood sugar go up. And so that's where it comes from. But that is not the pathophysiology of diabetes. In other words, whenever we eat a carbohydrate, our blood sugar is going to go up and carbohydrates are going to go into our bloodstream. But that doesn't cause diabetes. What causes diabetes is insulin resistance, which we're going to get into, and insulin sensitivity in a minute. So I ask her, for example, people say fruit can cause diabetes. And study after study shows that whole carbohydrates, like fruit, are consistently associated with the reduced risk to diabetes. So fruit does not cause diabetes. In fact, fruit has water in it, it has antioxidants and different vitamins and minerals in it, it has some fiber. Fruit is a good thing when you're a diabetic, whole fruit. And that doesn't mean you eat, well, there's some people who do go on fruitarian diets and they don't get diabetes, but whole fruit, a couple pieces a day, no problem. So there's a concept called insulin sensitivity and insulin resistance. And this is where diabetes actually comes from. So when sugar is going to be absorbed into the cell, insulin is secreted and it opens the door. So insulin resistance is you need more insulin to open that door to allow sugar in. So the key is what causes insulin resistance. And that is fat in the muscle cells, in the liver cells. It's called intramyocellular or fat. And most people don't know this. And I know that Dr. Kahleova and her group have actually done, I believe it's either MRI or some types of scans on the internal organs to see how much fat there is in there. So the less fat you have in the cells in your internal organs, and primarily saturated fat is what aggravates that and being overweight, the more you'll have insulin resistance. So what that means is your insulin will go up to push the sugar into the cell. So if I'm lean internally, I need less insulin to push sugar into the cell. So if you have a lot of internal fat in your cells, then you're going to need more insulin. And insulin is an inflammatory hormone and can aggravate fat deposition. It can make you easier to become fat. It is a pro-growth hormone. It's pro-inflammatory. So we don't want high levels of insulin. So the key is to have insulin sensitivity at its peak, meaning a little bit of sugar comes in, the door opens, and the sugar goes into the cell, no problem. And how we do that? Well, in her work, they found out that it's the intramyocellular fat, which she reviews saturated fat is the worst of doing that, of getting into the cell and making insulin resistance go up, and that will lead to type 2 diabetes. Now, if for an autoimmune reason or that you've just worn out your pancreas, which produces the insulin, then you can get type 1 diabetes, meaning you can't produce insulin, or you can produce very little. Sometimes that happens with aging as well. And that's type 1 diabetes. But in the studies, in both type 2 diabetes, where you have insulin resistance, or type 1 diabetes, where you just frankly can't produce enough insulin, you can still benefit by lowering the insulin need by going on a whole food plant-based diet that's low in fat. And the studies, as I said, are right there. So the key is not addressing so much as sugar comes into the cell or sugar is taken into the body. It's how we metabolize it that ends up creating the diabetic problem. Now, can you cure or reverse diabetes with a whole food plant-based diet? Yes, you can. And you can reduce insulin need in type 1s. Science is there. But can you do it with a ketogenic diet? Yes, you can. I've seen many people reverse, well, not many, but a lot of people reverse their diabetes with a ketogenic diet if it's done correctly. But you're really bypassing the insulin resistance part, because when you go on a ketogenic diet, you're trying to switch your fuel source, or you are switching your fuel source from carbohydrate, sugar, to fat. And when you do that, you automatically reduce insulin need. So you get a lot of the benefits of insulin being lowered, because it's an inflammatory hormone and can cause major issues, and people can lose weight. So you can lose weight on both, and she addresses that. You can help reduce your diabetic risk or reverse diabetes on both. But the question is, one is dealing with how we deal with carbohydrates. That's a whole food plant-based diet, how we metabolize a whole food plant-based diet. The other is bypassing the whole carbohydrate process. So the question would be, and I've seen some people again do very well on ketogenic diets and dramatically change their weight, diabetes. And so the question is, are you going to stay on a ketogenic diet for the rest of your life? And we don't know really. I mean, there's some people are going to try it, but we don't know in large scale what happens if people stay on a ketogenic diet all their life long. We just don't know that. And we don't know the health consequences. We know that you could probably reverse diabetes, lose weight. People use it in treating Alzheimer's disease. I'm very aware of that group. So there are some benefits, but the long-term benefits we don't know. We do know the long-term benefits of a whole food plant-based diet. We have studied the Seventh-day Adventists fairly well. They're a healthy group, the longest living group in the world. I'm not going to argue that. So if you are going to try and reverse your diabetes and you're doing it with a whole food plant-based diet, I very much encourage you to read the science that's below here in Dr. Kahleova's interview. But the key is that you must eat unprocessed carbohydrate. As I look at people come into the practice doing varying diets, if you're going to be a whole food plant-based person, you can't eat processed carbohydrate. And in our culture, I think the hardest thing to do is to not eat processed carbohydrate. People can go on meat and vegetable diets. People can go on plant-based diets, but we are surrounded by processed carbohydrates, which have additives in them. They have added sugar in them. They have the wrong kind of fats put in them, and they are low in fiber. And so they are a problem. And I think they're probably the biggest problem. So like in a ketogenic diet, you take away processed carbohydrates. In a paleo diet, you take away processed carbohydrates. In a whole food plant-based diet, you take away processed carbohydrates. You only eat good, whole, complex carbohydrates. And that's the real key. And to me, that's the message for the patient. Whole food plant-based diets have a ton of science in them in reversing diabetes. There's no doubt in my mind, if the whole world was whole food plant-based, diabetes, heart disease, would be virtually gone if it was done correctly. Now, if it was done incorrectly and you eat a processed plant-based diet, you're going to get in trouble. So I hope this helps people because you want to have a choice. Excuse me. You want to have a choice of how you want to approach reducing your diabetic risk. Diabetes, any way you cut it, is a bad illness. Increases the risk of heart disease, increases the risk of cognitive decline, increases your risk to being overweight, increases your risk of kidney disease, um, just about every disease. So if you can control blood sugar, i.e., and control insulin, then you're going to do much better. So below is my maybe 15, 20 questions to Dr. Kahleova on whole food plant-based diets and the science behind them. But the key message from this is if you eat a carbohydrate, whether you have animal food or not, you want to eat it in its whole state as it comes out of the ground, as you can see it. And then you will get fiber, you'll get slower blood sugar and insulin responses, and then carbohydrates won't be the evil. And you eat them in their whole state, whole fruit versus juices. Okay. So my name is Kirk Hamilton. The print interview is below this video and all the citations. I encourage you to go through it. It doesn't take a long time to read. It's very informative. And I'll talk to you soon, and you have a great day.